Chapter 2. A Very Magical Revelation. By the time Harry was 11, the cupboard under the stairs had become the headquarters of what he privately called the Resistance. It was still cramped, still dusty, and still occasionally home to the world's rudest spider, but it was also where Tom sharpened his claws on Dudley's forgotten picture books, where Jerry kept a stash of pilfered crumbs in a hollowed-out shoe, and where 3 conspirators whispered plans for the downfall of boredom. If the Dursleys had known they were sharing their house with a kitten who could pick locks using a hairpin and a mouse who could disassemble a toaster in under 30 seconds, they would have moved, possibly to another country. But they didn't know. Not yet. On the morning everything changed, Harry woke to the gentle, uneven rhythm of Tom's purr thrumming against his feet, and the faint, scratchy snore that meant Jerry had fallen asleep face down in a biscuit crumb again. Someone banged on the cupboard door. "Up! Get up! Now!" Harry flinched, hitting his head on the underside of the stairs. Tom's fur went on end. Jerry popped upright with a muffled squeak and dove instinctively into Harry's pyjama sleeve. Aunt Petunia's nose-pinched voice pierced through the wood. "Up! It's Dudley's big day! Birthday! We don't have time for you lazing around." Tom rolled his eyes so hard his whole head moved with the motion. He mimed playing a tiny trumpet and pulling a long, sulky face like Dudley's. Harry snorted softly, then called, "Coming, Aunt Petunia." The door unlocked with a clack. Harry slid out, keeping his arm close so Jerry wouldn't tumble out of his sleeve. Tom eased past his ankles with the graceful indignation of a cat who should have his own bedroom, thank you very much, not share with humans under stairs. They moved through the morning chaos like veteran spies. Dudley stormed around the living room, counting presents and wailing about unfairness in a voice that could stun goats at 50 paces. Uncle Vernon's moustache bristled like a furious hedgehog as he muttered about spoiling the boy properly. Aunt Petunia floated around, smoothing tablecloths and kissing Dudley's head so many times, Harry wondered if she meant to polish it. Jerry peeped out of Harry's sleeve, took one look at the mountain of wrapped boxes, and made a disbelieving face. He pointed at Dudley, then at himself, then spread his arms wide to indicate Dudley's size, mouthing, "All those?" For that? Tom, tail swishing, padded along the wall, keeping low. He made a little crown out of a scrap of ribbon and mimed putting it on an invisible Dudley, then stuck his nose in the air and waddled with his stomach puffed out. Jerry nearly fell out of the sleeve, laughing silently. Harry bit the inside of his cheek to keep from joining in. It was just another Dursley day, only louder. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, not even Tom with his sharp eyes, or Jerry with his sharper nose, was that the universe had decided this was the perfect day to send a letter with his name on it. The first one arrived while Dudley was busy having a tantrum over a present that turned out to be 36 computer games instead of 37. The post flapped through the letterbox and landed on the mat. Uncle Vernon shuffled over, still muttering about ungrateful. Then he stopped. Staring up at him from the mat was a thick, yellowish envelope addressed in emerald green ink. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Tom, who happened to be lurking on the stairs, froze. His pupils turned into perfectly round coins as he read the words. He looked at Harry's cupboard door, then back at the letter, then at Harry, who was collecting wrapping paper from under Dudley's stomping feet. Jerry, peeking from Harry's shirt pocket now, also saw. His ears quivered, his jaw dropped, and he yanked a scrap of pencil from his crumb stash, scribbling an invisible note in the air. "They know where you sleep." Uncle Vernon snatched up the letter before Harry could even approach the hall, his thick fingers tightening around the parchment. "What's that, Dad?" Dudley demanded. "Nothing," Vernon snapped. "Addressed to the boy. A mistake. Some sort of stupid advertising trick." Tom slid his claws into the stair carpet and began inching down like a feline spy, eyes glued to the envelope. Jerry gestured wildly from Harry's pocket, miming grabbing, biting, stealing. Aunt Petunia appeared at Vernon's elbow, took one look, and went whiter than her best tablecloth. "Vernon," she whispered, "it's them." Vernon went a sort of blotchy purple. He stared at the letter as though it was about to explode. Then, with jerky movements, he ripped it open. A slip of parchment fell out. Tom lunged. He didn't make it. Vernon's shoe came down between Tom and the letter. The kitten skidded to a stop so fast his back end did a little wheeling motion. He arched up, fur puffed, ready to claw the man's ankles to ribbons. Jerry shot out of Harry's pocket, grabbed Tom's tail with both paws, and dug his heels into the carpet. Tom yelped soundlessly, spun, and nearly flattened Jerry, but the moment of distraction was enough. Aunt Petunia whisked the letter away. Harry stood a few feet off, heart thudding, utterly bewildered. "Uncle Vernon, who's it from? It had my cupboard on it." "Nothing," Vernon barked, stuffing the parchment back into the torn envelope. Just wrong address, junk mail, into the bin." Tom and Jerry exchanged a look that said, "Junk doesn't use emerald ink and know your exact bowl hole," but they were powerless to stop Vernon as he crumpled the whole thing in his great hand and marched out to the kitchen. The bin lid clanged shut. That should have been that, but the next day there were 3 letters, then 10, then 20. They came through the letterbox, under the door, slid through the small gap in the kitchen window. One shot down the chimney, bounced off Vernon's bold spot with a paff, and landed in his cereal. He bellowed. Aunt Petunia shrieked. Dudley laughed until one smacked into his face, whereupon he decided this was somehow Harry's fault. Tom and Jerry thrived in the chaos. On one particularly glorious morning, letters poured from every opening like a blizzard of parchment. Vernon flung himself at the front door, arms wide, trying to block the letterbox. 7 envelopes shot between his legs. 3 ricocheted off his backside and stuck, flapping comically. 1 slid up his sleeve, another dove straight down his shirt. Tom, perching on the stairs banister, watched with open delight. His eyes tracked a letter sailing gracefully toward Harry's head. Jerry leapt. Time seemed to slow. The mouse launched off the banister like a tiny heroic cannonball, arms stretched forward. He caught the envelope mid-air, spun 3 times, and landed on Harry's shoulder, clinging with his tail. He puffed out his chest, beaming. Then he realized Uncle Vernon was staring at him. Human, cat, mouse, all 3 froze. Vernon's mouth opened, closed, opened again, slam. A cupboard door on the dresser had also burst open from the force of Vernon's earlier lunge. A stack of plates crashed out, one ricocheting off the table and flying straight toward Tom. The kitten ducked. The plate whooshed over his head, sliced through 3 letters, and embedded itself in the wall. "Paper snowed down," Vernon roared, charging at the nearest thing he could blame, Harry. "Into your cupboard, all of you, out of my sight." Harry scooped Jerry into his hands and bolted, Tom streaking ahead like a grey-blue thunderbolt. They tumbled into the cupboard, Harry slamming the door just as Vernon's hand slapped over it, rattling the wood. "Not one more funny business," Vernon howled through the door. "Not one more letter. We're leaving. Do you hear me? We'll go somewhere they won't find us." In the dark, Harry's breath came fast. Tom clung to one of the coat hooks, tail fluffed to twice its normal size. Jerry sprawled on Harry's pillow, dizzy from his mid-air stunt, then dragged himself up and began rapidly drawing in the dust. He sketched a rough envelope shape, then scribbled a big question mark and underlined it twice. "I don't know," Harry whispered, hugging his knees. "I didn't write anyone. I don't know who they are, or why they'd send me letters. Nobody ever—" His throat tightened. He stopped. Tom's expression softened. He dropped from the hook and padded over, headbutting Harry's arm. Then, with exaggerated care, he pretended to write in the air, puffing out his chest like an important official. Then pointed at Harry, mimed putting a crown on his head, and spread his paws wide to indicate something big. Jerry nodded, then underlined his dusty question mark and tapped it for emphasis. Harry shrugged helplessly. "I'm just me. They probably made a mistake. People don't write me letters. They don't even say happy birthday. They don't even—" He broke off again. Tom and Jerry exchanged a glance that was almost angry on his behalf. Jerry slammed a tiny fist into his open palm, then began an elaborate pantomime in which he climbed invisible stairs, knocked on an invisible door, and dramatically handed an invisible letter to an invisible important person, only to have the letter explode into confetti that rained down over him. He feigned surprise, then joy, then flopped backward in an exaggerated faint. Harry couldn't help it. He laughed. All right, he said. If the letters start exploding into confetti, then I'll believe someone really wants to talk to me. The next day, Uncle Vernon shoved the entire family into the car with a picnic basket, a stack of Dudley's favourite snacks, and an expression of maniacal determination. "Where are we going?" Dudley whined from the back seat, surrounded by crisps. "Far away," Vernon muttered. "Far away from those blasted letters." Harry, sandwiched between Dudley's elbow and the car door, exchanged a look with Jerry, who peeked from his pocket, and Tom, who was curled at Harry's feet on the car floor, disguised as a dozing lump of cat. Jerry mimed steering a wheel with wild zigzags, then pretended to read a map, turn it upside down, and shrug. Tom smirked and mimed rowing a boat, looking seasick. They weren't far off. After a series of wrong turns, several roadside arguments, and one incident where Vernon threatened a very confused postman, the Dursleys wound up driving to the coast. Rain lashed the windows. Waves crashed against jagged rocks. In the distance, lit only by flashes of lightning, a forlorn shack clung to a hunk of rock out at sea, like a soggy barnacle. "There," Vernon said proudly, as though he'd discovered a luxury hotel. "They'll never find us there." Tom pressed his face to the window, ears flat, watching the heaving sea with a wary eye. Jerry saw the shack and immediately mimed the roof collapsing, the bed sinking, tidal waves and widespread drowning. Harry wasn't thrilled either, but no one asked his opinion. The boat they hired to reach the shack smelled of fish, mould and despair. Every time a wave hit the side, Tom went rigid, clinging to Harry's jumper with all four paws, claws digging in just enough to be noticed. Jerry tied an imaginary life jacket around himself, then Harry, then Tom, then gestured to the empty air for good measure. By the time they arrived, Harry was soaked to the bone. Dudley was moaning about television, Vernon was grumbling about the price of boats, and Aunt Petunia was shrieking about seaweed. A natural and nuanced tone for an authentic conversation. Inside, the shack was little more than a single room with a fireplace that grudgingly accepted a fire, a few sagging mattresses, and a draught that cut straight through Harry's tooth-and clothes. Uncle Vernon nailed up a few old boards over the broken windows, looking grimly satisfied. "No post, no electricity, no phone. Perfect," he announced. Tom and Jerry explored immediately. Tom discovered that one corner of the shack had a small hole in the wall where the wind howled like a ghost. He slid one paw in, squinted, then yanked it back with a startled hiss when a particularly strong gust puffed dust into his nose, making him sneeze so hard his whole body left the floor. Jerry jumped onto the rickety table, tested it once, it wobbled, groaning, and then began bouncing on it higher and higher until one of the legs gave way. The whole thing crashed, narrowly missing Dudley's feet. Dudley squealed. "Rat!" he shouted, scrambling onto a mattress. Jerry, hidden behind a cracked plate, rolled his eyes and waggled his tail at Harry. Night fell. The storm grew worse. Dudley snored on the better mattress, wrapped in blankets. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia huddled together, muttering about first thing in the morning and talked to someone about pest control. Harry stretched out on the thinnest mattress in the coldest corner. Tom curled on his chest, a warm, heavy weight, purring like a small engine to compensate for the rattling windows. Jerry tucked himself into the crook of Harry's neck like a furry scarf. Harry stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was his birthday. Not that anyone would remember. Not that it mattered. Birthdays weren't a thing in Dursley World. But here, with rain battering the roof and two small bodies breathing beside him, it mattered more than usual that someone knew he existed. He glanced at the glowing face of Dudley's watch, borrowed earlier and sneakily studied. Only a few minutes to midnight. Jerry followed his gaze, then counted down on his fingers, eyes wide. 5, 4, 3, 2. A tremendous crash shook the shack. The door flew open as if the night itself had decided to pay a visit. Wind howled in, rain lashed the floor. The tiny fire shuddered. Framed in the doorway, taking up nearly all of it, was the largest man Harry had ever seen. He was taller than Uncle Vernon, even when Vernon was standing on his pride. He was broader than the doorway. His hair and beard were a wild, tangled forest, glittering with raindrops. He wore a gigantic moleskin overcoat that looked like it had eaten several smaller coats, and a pair of boots with mud so thick it crumbled in clumps on the floor. He had to stoop to enter. The shack seemed to grow smaller around him. Uncle Vernon sprang up, clutching a broken bit of table like a shield. Aunt Petunia shrank behind him. Dudley squeaked and buried his face in a pillow. Tom and Jerry reacted a little differently. Tom's fur puffed so dramatically he nearly doubled in size. His tail shot straight up like a fuzzy exclamation point. His eyes bulged. He took one look at the enormous silhouette looming in the doorway and darted up the nearest set of hanging mildewed coats, scrambling so fast his legs blurred until he was plastered flat against the ceiling beam, trembling. Jerry shot upright on Harry's shoulder, stared, then did a rapid double-take. His jaw dropped so far it looked like it might hit the floor. He pulled his own lower jaw back into place with both paws, then looked again. The giant man ducked properly inside and slammed the door behind him, shutting out most of the storm. The shack rattled in protest. "Sorry about that," the man said, his voice like boulders tumbling down a mountain. "I'll fix that up in a jiffy, don't you worry." Harry blinked. The man's eyes, hidden under bushy eyebrows, slid past Vernon, past Petunia, past Dudley, and landed squarely on Harry. "There you are," he said warmly, as though Harry was the only person in the room. "Harry, last time I saw you, you was no bigger than a ferret." Jerry glanced at Harry, then at his own tiny body, then at the enormous stranger, then mimed measuring Harry's height with his hands, his face saying plainly, "I find that hard to believe." Uncle Vernon drew himself up. "I demand that you leave at once, sir. You are breaking and entering. I will call the police." The giant ignored him. He strode forward. Each step made the shack floorboards groan. He reached down, plucked a bent shotgun from Vernon's hands as though it were a toy, tied it into a knot without even looking, and tossed it into a corner. Tom, up on the ceiling beam, clapped both paws over his mouth to keep from yowling. Jerry's eyes turned into perfect little stars of awed disbelief. He pointed at the twisted shotgun, then at his own scrawny biceps, flexed with all his might, and then flopped his arm around uselessly. The man turned back to Harry. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, already sitting on what had been the sofa. The whole thing sagged. Dust poofed. No?" Harry said. The man beamed. "That's better. Name's Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." The strange word hung in the air. Hogwarts. Jerry silently mouthed it several times, his tongue twisting around the syllables, then scribbled a rough version in the dust on the floor. Hogwort, underlining it, then shrugging helplessly. Tom, curiosity getting the better of him, inched forward on the ceiling beam. His claws slipped. He flailed, managed to catch himself, and then dangled upside down by his back legs, swaying gently. Hagrid didn't seem to notice the circus above his head. "And you must be Harry," Hagrid said again, his big face creasing into a smile. "You look just like your dad, except for your eyes. You've got your mum's eyes, bright as anything." Harry's stomach flipped. His parents. No one talked about them. A soft pat on his cheek made him glance sideways. Jerry, face suddenly serious, had placed both paws over his heart and glanced up, as if offering silent support. Tom, still hanging upside down, nodded slowly, his ears dipping. Harry swallowed. You know my parents?" Hagrid's expression shifted, sadness flickering across his face. "Knew 'em, yeah. Brilliant witch and wizard they were. Everyone knew 'em." Witch. Wizard. The words fell into the room like bricks. Uncle Vernon exploded. "I forbid you to talk about that freakish nonsense in front of the boy." Hagrid's eyes narrowed. The temper of a thunderstorm rolled across his features. "Nonsense?" he rumbled. "Is it now?" He reached into his enormous coat and pulled out something that made both Tom and Jerry lean forward in unison, eyes wide. It was a pink, slightly squashed birthday cake. "Thought I'd bring you summat," Hagrid said, a bit shyly. "Happy birthday, Harry." He handed it over. Harry stared. The cake had Happy B-I-T-H-A, Harry, scrawled on it in green icing, slightly crooked and lumpy, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. His name on a cake. Tom lost his hold. Whump! He landed squarely in Harry's lap, sending a small cloud of dust and cat fur into the air. Jerry toppled forward into the frosting, his face smearing through the green icing. For a second, the mouse froze there, eyes crossing, as he went slightly cross-eyed looking at his frosting-coated nose. Then he stuck out his tongue experimentally. Jerry's eyes rolled back in bliss. He sagged across the cake like someone who had just tasted heaven. He hugged the icing. Tom, now also dusted in green, took a cautious lick. His pupils dilated. He snatched another mouthful with both paws, stuffing his cheeks until they bulged. Then he froze, glancing up at Harry with a guilty expression. Harry laughed, a stunned, incredulous little burst of joy, and Hagrid jumped. "Blimey," Hagrid said, blinking. "Did that cat just—" He peered closer. Tom froze in mid-lick. Jerry very carefully lowered the bit of icing he had been about to steal and arranged himself in a statue-like pose, as if to say, "Who, me? I'm just a regular mouse, totally normal, not at all involved in any cake crimes." Hagrid squinted, then shrugged. "Smart little fella, ain't he?" Uncle Vernon, red as a beetroot, finally managed to find his voice again. "We do not need you stuffing the boy's head with your lunacy." "We told you, he knows nothing, and he'll stay that way." "Knows nothing?" Hagrid repeated dangerously. "Nothing? He don't know nothing about anything?" He turned to Harry, almost gently. "You don't know, do you? You don't know what you are." Harry clutched the cake box. Tom and Jerry both looked up at him, cake forgotten. "What I am?" Harry echoed, confused. I'm just Harry. Just—" He hesitated. "A boy who lives in a cupboard." Jerry's brow furrowed. He pointed emphatically at Harry, then mimed a crown again, like he had in the cupboard weeks ago, but this time added a blazing halo, jazz hands, and an exaggerated gasp, as if to say, "More than that, way more." Hagrid sighed, muttering something very rude about the Dursleys under his breath. Then he drew himself up and looked Harry straight in the eye. "Harry," he said, "you're a wizard." Silence crashed into the shack, louder than the storm outside. Harry's brain did a somersault. His tongue apparently failed at its job. "I'm a— what?" Hagrid smiled, a little sadly. "A wizard, and a thumping good night wager once you've been trained up, like your mum and dad." If the word had dropped like a brick before, now it exploded like fireworks. Tom's jaw actually unhinged. He fell backward off Harry's lap, legs kicking in the air, then scrambled upright and pointed at Harry, then at Hagrid, then at himself, then spun around in a circle, paws on his head, every bit of him screaming, "What?" Jerry grabbed a loose bit of string from the floor, tied it around Harry's wrist like a bracelet, then stretched the other end between his paws, leaned back, and mimed electricity zapping through it. He shook all over, eyes wide, then pointed at Harry's hand, at his own frazzled whiskers, then burst into frantic applause. Harry's heart hammered. "But I can't be. I mean, I make weird things happen sometimes, but that's just me being me. I thought I was wrong, not magic." He remembered his hair growing back overnight after Aunt Petunia shaved it, appearing suddenly on the school roof when he'd just wanted to escape Dudley and his gang, the glass vanishing from the snake's enclosure at the zoo. Little accidents. Tom and Jerry's eyes both narrowed with dawning understanding. They looked at each other, then at Harry. Jerry mimed Harry shrinking, then popping back up, his hair springing out like a jack-in-the-box. Tom mimed Dudley running into invisible glass and bouncing off. They both started laughing, then stopped as the reality of what Hagrid had said sank in. Harry was a wizard. Magic in their cupboard. Hagrid snorted. "Wrong? Course you're not wrong. You're a wizard born. Strange things are bound to happen round you when you're angry or scared. It's natural." Uncle Vernon spluttered. "We swore we'd stamp it out of him. We swore we'd—" Hagrid rounded on him, towering. "Stamp it out? Stamp it out? You can't stamp out magic any more than you can stop the sea with a broom, Dursley. What in Merlin's beard possessed you to keep him in a cupboard?" His anger seemed to crackle in the air. Tom and Jerry both leaned into it, eyes gleaming. They mimed stamping on Vernon with giant boots, sweeping him out to sea, then stuffing him into a cupboard of his own. Harry stared between them all, his mind whirling. A wizard? He looked down at his thin hands, at the faded band of sunburn on his wrist, where his 2 big sleeves had ridden up. They didn't look like wizard hands, they looked like cupboard hands. Jerry squeezed one of his fingers gently, then struck a pose, throwing his arm out as though holding a wand, face alight with dramatic importance. He pointed at Harry, nodded firmly, and repeated the gesture toward him. You, magic, big time. Tom, having recovered from his earlier tumble, hopped lightly onto Harry's shoulder. He squinted at Hagrid, then at Harry, then reached over and flicked lightly at Harry's lightning-shaped scar. The mark tingled under his fur. Hagrid's gaze flickered to the scar as well. He sobered. "And there's more that you've not been told," he said quietly. "But we'll get to that. First things first, Hogwarts letter." He rummaged in his coat again. After pulling out a wilted flower, what looked suspiciously like a teapot, and a live owl that hooted indignantly and flapped to the rafters, he finally produced a slightly crumpled envelope, identical to the ones that had been chasing Harry for days. He handed it over. Harry took it with trembling fingers. Tom and Jerry crowded in, practically climbing onto his hands. Jerry squinted at the handwriting, his nose almost touching the parchment. Tom tilted his head, reading upside down, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Harry broke the seal. His eyes scanned the words aloud in a whisper. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The rest blurred. Accepted, school, witchcraft and wizardry. A place where people like him went. As he read, something strange happened in the shack. The air felt different, charged, as if someone had rubbed a balloon on the world's biggest jumper. Tom's fur fluffed slightly, even though he wasn't frightened. Jerry's whiskers crackled. Hagrid grinned. "Knew he'd get through in the end." Uncle Vernon exploded into fresh protests about not paying for crackpot schools and not funny business, but his words sounded distant to Harry. Jerry leapt down from Harry's hand to the rough floorboards. He spread his arms wide, pantomiming a vast castle with towers so tall he had to stand on tiptoe to reach them. He drew swooping staircases in the dirt, then little mouse-sized figures flying on broomsticks, their tails streaming behind them. Tom's eyes widened. He grabbed a charred stick from near the fireplace, held it like a wand, and swished it dramatically. He pointed at the fireplace, then at a pile of driftwood. He squeezed his eyes shut, clearly willing something to happen. Nothing did. Tom opened one eye, disappointed. Jerry waggled his fingers in front of Tom, then pointed at Harry. "He's the wizard." Hagrid, watching curiously, chuckled. "Smart little beasties, those." He reached out one enormous hand and stroked Tom's back gently, then Jerry's head with the tip of one finger. Tom bristled automatically, then melted under the scritch, his purr rumbling like a tiny engine. Jerry leaned into the touch, eyes going soft. "Reckon you two'll be wantin' to come along, eh?" Hagrid said conversationally, looking at Harry. "Hogwarts allows pets. Could do with a proper mouser in the kitchens, and a friend for ye." Harry's heart leapt. "They can come?" The thought of leaving Tom and Jerry behind in Privet Drive, with the Dursleys, with no one to understand them or laugh at their antics, had been a heavy stone in his chest since Hagrid had said, "School." "They've been my best friends," Harry said quietly. Tom tried to look dignified at being called a best friend, but his tail betrayed him, lashing with pleasure. Jerry made a show of dusting off his shoulders, as if being promoted to best friend was the natural next step in his illustrious career. Hagrid nodded firmly. "Course they can, long as they don't eat any of the students." Tom glanced at Jerry with a thoughtful expression. Jerry held up a tiny sign, pulled from somewhere, with the word Union scribbled on it, then smacked Tom lightly with it. Tom rolled his eyes and made a lock and key motion over his mouth, promising silence. Uncle Vernon, overhearing none of this but sensing a loss of control, lurched forward. "He's not going! We swore when we took him in we'd—" Hagrid boomed. "When you took him in, you swore you'd tell him what he was, that you'd raise him knowing his own world, and instead you gave him a cupboard, fear and lies. While I'm telling him now, Harry Potter's a wizard, and he's coming to Hogwarts. End of." The name hung in the air. Harry Potter. Tom and Jerry both froze. They turned to look at Harry, then at each other. Jerry inched toward Hagrid's boot, tugged on a lace to get his attention, then mimed a huge crowd, waving and cheering. He pointed at Harry, then at the imaginary crowd, then at Hagrid, eyebrows raised. Hagrid frowned down. "Was that, little fella?" He looked back at Harry. "Course, they don't know, do they?"
"Course they don't. You don't know why everyone'll be staring at you neither." Harry, feeling increasingly like someone standing at the edge of a very large cliff, shook his head. "I'll tell you on the way," Hagrid said softly. "But for now, all you need to know is, you're not wrong, Harry. You're not a freak. You're a wizard, and there's a whole world of people like you waiting." Tom and Jerry looked at Harry with something new in their eyes. Not just mischief, not just camaraderie born of stolen biscuits and shared danger. Pride. Harry swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. There's really a place where I belong?" he whispered. Jerry nodded so fiercely he nearly headbutted Harry's chin. He then mimed tossing the shack away like rubbish and opened his paws wide to display an invisible glittering world. Tom hopped up onto Harry's shoulder again and, with great ceremony, mimed placing a wizard's hat, tall and pointy, on Harry's head. It slid down over his eyes in the pantomime, and Tom had to yank it back up again, making both Harry and Jerry silently giggle. Outside, the storm began to ease. The wind no longer shrieked quite so angrily. The rain softened. Inside the soggy shack on the rock, under a leaking roof and a sputtering fire, 3 lives tilted. Harry held his Hogwarts letter in hands that still shook. Tom and Jerry, 2 silent pranksters who had once thought the height of adventure was tripping Spike into his own water bowl, clung to him, heads buzzing with visions of castles, ghosts, floating food, and, most of all, a Harry who wasn't the boy in the cupboard, but Harry Potter, wizard. None of them knew exactly what waited out there. They only knew this: the world was suddenly bigger than Privet Drive, bigger than cupboards and broken toasters and Dudley's whining. There was magic, and Harry had it. Tom and Jerry, exchanging a single, giddy, terrified grin, silently vowed to themselves, whatever this wizarding world was, it had no idea what was coming.